When I was about 10 and my sister was 11 or 12, my mother told us this story. She said she was around 4 or 5 years old at the time. My grandmother, her mother, lived in a trailer back then. She'd arranged their beds right next to the window, which, as it turned out, was a mistake. It was a weekday. Grandma worked during the day, and when night fell, they both went to sleep. Then, sometime in the middle of the night, my mother woke up. She saw a man standing outside of her window, staring straight at her. Terrified, she ran to my grandmother's room and said, "There's a scary man outside the window." But Grandma didn't believe her. She told her to go back to bed. When Mom returned to her room, the man was gone. He wasn't standing there anymore. She remembered him clearly though. Tall, with a bushy white beard and dirty brown hair. His clothes were filthy, light brown pants and a jacket, like someone who'd been living on the streets. Still scared, Mom crawled into Grandma's bed for the rest of the night. The next morning, Grandma got up early, getting ready for work, and to drop Mom off at the babysitter's. Everything seemed fine and normal. But when they came back home a few hours later, everything wasn't normal, and when they first got a look at the trailer, they froze. Mom's window was gone. Someone had ripped it right out of the trailer wall. Nothing else had been touched. No jewelry missing, no money taken, nothing stolen except the window. Grandma didn't wait around. They packed up and moved in with Grandma's grandparents soon after. The man was never seen again, and that's what's always haunted me. Hello, Wansee. I wanted to share with you what I've experienced. It happened a long time ago when I was about 10 years old. Back then, I was living in a small house where all the rooms were connected to each other. Since we didn't have enough space, my 2 brothers would sleep in one room while I, my mom, and my little sister shared another. It was late one night, around 3 in the morning, and I was still awake watching cartoons on our old TV. Then, the door to my room slowly opened. Standing there was one of my brothers, but even with the light from the TV, I couldn't see his face. His entire body was just a black silhouette. As a kid, I didn't think much of it. I figured the light was maybe just playing tricks on my eyes. He sat down on the edge of the bed beside me without saying a word. His face turned toward the TV. I asked him softly if he couldn't sleep either, and if he wanted to change the channel. But he never responded. He just sat there, perfectly still, not moving a single muscle. That was strange, because my brother could never sit still. He was always fidgeting, always shifting around. But this version of him didn't even blink. After a while, I needed to use the bathroom. I slipped quietly out of bed so I wouldn't wake my mom or sister and hurried down the hall. When I came back, I passed my brother's room and froze. Both of my brothers were fast asleep. They were tangled together under their blanket, breathing heavily, not an inch of space between them. It was impossible that one of them had been in my room just moments ago. My heart dropped. My hands started shaking, but somehow I forced myself to move. I ran back toward my room. The bed was empty. The silhouette was gone, and that's when it hit me. I never actually saw its face. I didn't even know if it had been looking at the TV or at me. Even now, I still think about that night. I'll never know who or what was sitting beside me, and honestly, I'm glad I'll never find out. Hey Wansee, I'm going to share a really scary experience I had at my school. My school looks totally normal. Bright hallways, the usual classrooms, nothing weird about it. But over the years, there have been a few strange stories that have gone around. There was one about a theft that happened a while back. Apparently, a man disguised himself, got inside the school, and ripped a pair of gold earrings right off a student's ears. I still don't know if that's true or just one of those rumors that gets passed down, but it definitely freaked people out. Anyway, here's what happened to me. It was a regular day, but I remember being really tired because we had a ton of work to do. Later that day, my friend Katie and I were walking down the hallway after coming back from class. The hallway was completely empty. No teachers, no students, just us. As we were walking, I suddenly got this strange feeling like someone was watching us. I looked around, but didn't see anyone. Then I noticed a classroom nearby. The door was closed and the lights were off. There's a small glass window on every classroom door so I could see inside, and what I saw still scares me to this day. Inside, there was a girl. She was standing perfectly still, staring right at me. Her skin was pale, almost gray, and blood was running from her ears. For a second, I couldn't move. It felt like she was staring straight into my soul. Katie asked me what was wrong, but I didn't answer. I just grabbed her hand and ran. We bolted down the hallway until we reached our classroom. My face and hands were covered in cold sweat. Katie was confused and kept asking why I looked so terrified. When I told her what I'd seen, her eyes went wide. That's when she told me something that made my stomach drop. The day before, our teacher had asked her to turn off the lights before leaving class. I had already walked ahead, and she said that right as she flipped the switch, something caught her eye. She saw the same girl, pale, standing in the dark, with blood dripping from her ears. Katie said she panicked, ran out of the classroom, and didn't tell anyone because she thought no one would believe her. She had never shared her experience of what she saw until I had shared mine. To this day, I still wonder what would have happened if we hadn't run, if we stayed in that hallway just a little bit longer. Hey Wansee, I'm Ayla. I want to share a true experience that happened to me several times when I was a kid. I was around 8 years old, and my sister was 10. I grew up in a rough neighborhood where crime was almost a daily occurrence, and it wasn't unusual to see police in the area. At the time, my family lived in a small 2-story apartment building. You needed a key to enter, and there were only 2 units on each floor. We lived in one of the ground floor units. One night, I was home with my little sister and my little brother, who was asleep in my bed, my mom and my dad. I was on my tablet, my sister was on hers, and my mom was cooking dinner while my dad was watching TV. Everything felt normal until we suddenly heard glass shatter from the main entrance downstairs. It was loud enough for my entire family to hear. Everyone froze, and then yelling erupted outside. Moments later, someone began pounding violently on our door. My parents rushed in and told us to stay quiet and go to the kitchen. As my mom hurried us to safety, I caught a glimpse of our bedroom window and froze. It was wide open, and 2 to 4 men were staring right at us through it. The window didn't have a lock, which made it easy for them to try and get in. My sister and I screamed and grabbed our little brother, who was still half asleep. When I looked back, I saw the men struggling to climb through, but thankfully, our bunk bed was pressed against the window, blocking their way and buying us precious seconds. While we huddled in the living room, shaking with fear, my sister managed to call the police. It felt like forever before they arrived. Later, we found out there had been 5 men in total. 2 tried to escape, but were caught. They were arrested for attempted murder and robbery. The police questioned all of us, and eventually left 1 officer behind to watch the area for the night. My dad later had to testify in court, though I have no memory of it, and honestly, I'd rather not. Because of the trauma, my sister and I went to therapy for a while. To this day, I still don't know why we were targeted. Plenty of other families lived in that building. From what we later learned, the men have since been released, which is one of the reasons we moved in 2019. Since then, the apartment complex had replaced all the doors with shatterproof glass and added key or passcode access only for residents. Years have passed, and I'm now 15, almost 16, while my sister is almost 18. I still visit that building sometimes, but that night remains crystal clear in my mind. This story happened a few months ago, and it's the reason I get so paranoid when I take public transport at night. This is what happened. My part-time job is being a tutor for high schoolers. I work in a suburb that has a reputation for being shady, but from my own experience, I never found it too dangerous. You just have to stay aware of your surroundings from time to time, especially when you see sketchy people hanging around. Usually, I'm at the tutoring center from around 4 to 9 p.m., but at the time of this story, our Year 12 students were getting ready for their exit exams. That meant extra sessions, extra stress, and longer hours for us tutors. Some nights, we didn't leave until right before midnight, so one night, at around 11:30, I was waiting for my train. The station wasn't empty. There were a few people around, but I was the only one on my platform. All I could hear was the light drizzle outside and the sound of train announcements echoing through the empty air. That's when I heard laughter coming from my left. I looked over and saw a group of tall teenage boys, all wearing black hoodies and silver chains. They were exactly the kind of people that gave this suburb its reputation. I turned back toward my phone, pretending not to notice them. They kept talking and laughing, but then, suddenly, their voices dropped to whispers. That caught my attention. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see each of them staring at me. One of them nodded in my direction, showing a crooked smile. I froze, then quickly looked back down at my phone. Moments later, our train finally arrived. It was almost completely empty, just me and that group of teenagers. Trying to play it safe, I went to the carriage on the far right, the one closest to the driver's cabin, but the boys followed me, all of them. Inside the train, they started blasting rap music on a speaker, loud, aggressive, violent. The lyrics were about killings, gangs, and revenge. Then one of them caught me glancing their way. He yelled,
"You got a problem? I'll bash your head in!"
My heart exploded in my chest. I froze. He pulled out a knife, waved it just enough for me to see, and smiled, a slow, creepy grin, before turning back to his friends and continuing to rap along to the music. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I wanted to switch carriages, but that meant walking right past them, and I couldn't get off yet. The next stop was still 5 minutes away. So I did the only thing I could think of. I texted my friend, my hands shaking, explaining everything that was happening. He told me to take a photo of them so he could report it to the police. I pulled out my phone, took a quick picture, and that's when I realized I'd made a huge mistake. My phone wasn't on silent. That loud click gave me away instantly. All of them turned toward me, shouting. I shoved my phone into my jacket and froze, unable to understand what they were yelling, their voices all overlapping in anger. Just then, the train began to slow down. We were pulling into the next station. I didn't care that it wasn't my stop. The moment the doors opened, I ran. I jumped the payment gates without even thinking, sprinting through the station as they came chasing after me. I don't know where I was. It was a random stop, but I saw lights up ahead, a busy street, and I just ran toward it. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs gave out, and I hit the pavement. When I turned back, they were gone. I had lost them. I got up, still shaking, and walked toward the brighter part of the street. Shops, lights, cars, people. Finally, I could breathe again. I called my friend, and thank God, he came to pick me up. On the way home, I called the police and told them everything. They asked me to come in the next morning and bring my phone. The police never found the group, but I'm just thankful I never ran into them again. These days, my shifts end at 9, and I'm a lot more aware of my surroundings. Some of my friends tease me for being paranoid, but honestly, better safe than sorry. My name is Rima, and I am from Kolkata, India. The story I am going to share is about a scary series of incidents that happened to my friend when we were in high school. I'll call her Priya. Priya was a very kind and sensitive girl by nature. She was a close friend of mine back then, though our closeness faded during college. Everything I'm about to say now was told to me directly by her. Coming to the story, I always noticed that Priya, despite being such a kind girl, had always faced difficulties in her life. Even in her love life, none of her relationships ever worked out. It first started to happen when we were in the 11th grade, right after her breakup with her third boyfriend in school. Suddenly, one day, she looked scared, with a puzzled expression on her face, and she told me that she was seeing and hearing things. Now, anyone would think that this was a case of hallucinations caused by the trauma and depression from her breakup, but I don't know what was up with her. It didn't seem like mere hallucinations. She used to say she could hear someone whispering in her ear, or that whenever she studied late at night, she could hear a deep voice calling her name when there was no one else in the room. She told me that sometimes she would see, hear, and experience things that were completely unexplainable. She said that sometimes she felt a negative presence in her room, and sometimes she saw a shadowy figure of a girl sitting with her head buried in her arms near the dark corner of the room. She tried to ignore it and casually went on with her everyday life. I consoled her, saying she should see a therapist and try meditation, because I believed what she was experiencing was just depression from her breakup. For some reason, she was very close to me and shared many personal things with me, but sadly, day by day, things were getting worse. One day, I saw that her big toe was bandaged, and when I asked what happened, she told me something that sent shivers down my spine. She said that the previous day, while studying, she suddenly felt an urge to rip off her toenail forcibly. Even though she felt extreme pain, she was struggling to stop herself, as if some invisible evil energy had taken control of her body. That really scared me. It was then that I realized she was going through something paranormal, because the things happening to her couldn't just be hallucinations or depression. Sure, she was depressed and frustrated, which was natural, but that didn't explain the unusual things she experienced. A few days later, I heard from her that someone in her own family had performed black magic on her and sent an evil energy to cause her harm. Later, she told me she finally explained everything to her mother, who then sought help from a tantric, a sage who practices tantra and occult rituals involving yoga, spiritual meditation, and rituals. The tantric performed a ritual to cut off the effects of the black magic, and it worked. He told her that someone from her own bloodline had done the evil practice on her. Since then, Priya has been fine and hasn't expressed any more unusual activity. It's been a long time now. We aren't that close anymore, but when I see her Instagram posts, I feel relieved that she's doing well. I'm just happy that her problem was finally resolved.
Hi, I'm Aaron, and this is a true story that my father experienced many years ago. Take note that we're from the Philippines, and my father was from a small town at the countryside. Back when he was around 14, 13, when this happened, he and his friends would often go to the Betamax to watch movies and films. Back then, Betamax was like a cinema where you'd only have to pay 1 peso to get in. It was a 15-20 minute walk from their house, so they would often hang out there. So after the movie ended, my father and his friends were walking home. It was around 8:30 p.m. But since they live on the countryside, the nights there were often super dark and creepy, since streetlights in that area were rare. Soon my father and his friends separated, since they lived in different towns. As my father continued walking, he saw an old man beneath a streetlight. Sensing as it was dark and the old man looked weak, he approached the man and asked him, "Excuse me, sir, but why are you still out? It's dangerous out here." But the old man just stared at him. Due to the stories around that time and the warnings that his mom had given him, my dad then felt that something was off about that man. So he waved to the man and then quickly walked away. Around 5 minutes later, he noticed that the man was following him. However, as he turned around to see, it seemed like the old man had seen that he was following him. He could only see the back of the old man. My dad then got the chills, started to walk faster, but then he noticed that it also started to walk faster. Then he full-on sprinted to their house. While sprinting, he checked to see the old man, and what he saw will forever be engraved in his mind. He said that he saw the old man on all fours, crawling towards him with its body backwards, its head peeking underneath him, looking at him. That filled him with adrenaline, and he bolted to their house, kicking the door open, which startled his mom, and quickly locked the door. As soon as he locked it, a loud thud was heard from outside the door. He dared not look out. He explained to his mom what had happened, and his mom was obviously terrified. He could only scold him for going out late at night.
This happened 3 years ago at a motel in southern Arizona during a business trip. My company had booked the room last minute, so I arrived late that night, exhausted after a long drive down the dark highway. The shabby neon sign flickered red, and only a few vehicles, a truck and a couple of old cars, sat in the parking lot. At the front desk was an old man with a blank expression.
Long drives are tough, aren't they?
He said.
You look like you're about to faint. Please, go to room 107.
The room was small, as I expected, but not terrible, except for the strange framed paintings on the wall. I don't remember them clearly now, but one drawing looked like something between a gargoyle and a bat. It gave me chills. I muttered to myself, wondering why anyone would hang something like that in a motel room, and went to the bathroom to take a shower. Later, I was lying in bed, drifting off, when I heard footsteps in the hallway. Normally, I wouldn't have noticed, but these were loud, and they stopped right outside my door. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. Time passed, and whoever it was still hadn't moved. My heart started to race with a sudden, inexplicable fear. But I was so tired I could barely keep my eyes open. I managed to call the front desk and told them someone was standing outside my door. They asked me to check, but I hung up, too exhausted, and eventually fell asleep. When I opened my eyes, it was already morning. I asked the old man what had happened the night before. He said,
Oh, that guy from yesterday? He was standing still in front of your door. I watched him quietly. He didn't move for about 10 minutes. When I approached him, I saw his eyes were closed. I asked what he was doing. He didn't seem surprised, just smiled at me and said he was fantasizing about killing the person in that room. He told me exactly what he imagined doing. It was pretty disturbing stuff. He said he was picturing himself breaking the shoulder blade of the person inside.
The man at the desk sighed and continued.
So I told him to stop bothering other guests and go back to his room. He just stared at me with that same smile for a while, then quietly packed his things and left. I thought about calling the police, but since he hadn't done anything, I let it go. I watched him drive off onto the highway, and that was it.
After hearing that, I just stood there in silence. I thanked him and left the motel. I tried my best to act calm until I reached the car, but I haven't stayed in a motel since that night. Hello, my name is Kian Redhead. I want to tell you a story about something my foster brother Simon experienced a few years ago. I call him my brother because my sister and I were in foster care, and he was my sister's foster brother. This happened about 3 or 4 years ago when Simon was around 8 or 9 and I was 11. Simon, though somewhat fun, could also be a bit annoying. The rest of us playing were my sister Kiana, who was 10, and our older foster brother Gage, who was also 10. It was a weekend night near spring or summer in York Landing, Manitoba, in Canada, a very small reserve where we all lived. It was late, about 10 p.m., and it was raining. We decided to play manhunt. We all picked Simon to be it, and he gave us 30 seconds to run and hide. Since we all lived on a reserve, we had practically a whole forest, or a very large backyard, to hide in. I went to the backyard, heading close to the sandy pit where they kept gravel for construction. The rain had made the sand muddy. I went toward the bushes to hide, and Kiana was with me. Simon's perspective. Simon started searching and went down the trail that leads to the sandy pit. He took a left and started walking up the neighbor's path to loop back toward the houses. Then, he thought he saw me and Kiana walking together. He smiled and began following the figures, even though Kiana and I were already hidden. Simon stopped and dropped to the ground when one of the figures looked back at him, then took a sharp right into a forestry trail. He thought he heard us calling his name, so he backed away and went toward the house. My perspective. After a while, we hadn't heard from Simon, and no one had screamed, so Kiana and I went back to the house. Everyone was there, except Simon. After about 2 minutes of waiting, we all started to call out for him. We headed toward the neighbor's yard and found him walking toward us, crying. We hugged him and asked him what happened. He told us everything. We went and told the adults, but they didn't believe us. Simon said that he heard us call his name, and that's when he ducked to the ground and hid. He said the figure looked back when it heard us calling. I don't live there anymore, but Simon and Gage still do. Sometimes Kiana and I talk about it, and it gives me chills thinking about it. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Simon had followed that figure into the trail. I think it could have been a skinwalker pretending to be me and Kiana to lure him away. This story happened during a camping trip in the fall of 2019. At the time, I was attending college in Portland, and I decided to head south with my friend Jason for the weekend. I followed Jason's lead, and when we arrived at the campground, it was incredibly quiet, secluded, and there wasn't a lot of traffic. As I was pitching my tent, I noticed a sign attached to a tree. It said, "Private property, no trespassing," and underneath it, it was written, "Violators will be," and the rest of the text was erased. And below that, someone had spray painted the word "die" in red.
Haha, Jason, look at this. That's funny.
I told Jason, laughing. Jason's face hardened when he saw the sign. He told me that we might have to move camp somewhere else, but I told him we would be fine. So we made a fire and joked around until we fell asleep. Sometime later, I woke up in the middle of the night to a rustling sound outside the tent. I immediately knew it was someone walking, stepping on branches. I woke Jason. He heard it too, and his expression turned terrified. He whispered, "What should we do?" At that moment, the tent's zipper suddenly unzipped and someone poked their head inside. It was a man. He slowly smiled, a creepy, unsettling smile. His face was filthy, as if he hadn't washed in months. I could see his red eyes and rotted black teeth, but he didn't look like a simple homeless person. His face radiated an inexplicable, murderous aura. Then he said to us, "Haven't you seen the sign?" He put his hand into the tent, holding what looked like a large piece of bone. It looked like the bone of a large animal, long, sharp, and jagged, as if it had been deliberately ground into a point. With Jason's thunderous scream, I instinctively shoved the man's face away. He stumbled backward, and I bolted out of the tent like a bullet. He was swinging the bone at me, and I kicked him hard and yelled at Jason to start the car. Jason ran over, jumped in, and started it. I sprinted toward him, dove into the passenger seat, and we tore out of there. We left our tent and belongings behind and just kept driving. A few days later, when we returned, we were horrified. Our tent was covered in red spray paint with the word "die," and inside were two horribly mutilated animal carcasses. We couldn't even tell what kind of animals they were. We ran like crazy and never went back. Who on earth was that man? The terror of that night still haunts me. Maybe my story isn't really scary, but it was traumatic for a 9-year-old at the time. It was during the 2020 lockdown. We went on vacation since it was summer. My parents, me, my 2 older cousins, my aunt, her husband, and her 2 kids all went together. There were many of us. We stayed at a big resort. The resort looked like a 2 to 3 story high gray house. We got one big room that was enough for all of us. It had 2 or 3 bunk beds and one big bed for 2 or 3 people. And the first day was fine. The second night, someone began knocking on the door. My dad and my aunt's husband woke up first, then the rest of us started waking up one by one. We had already locked our door before going to sleep, so at first we didn't worry. But my aunt's husband bent down and looked under the door. There was a little space under it, so he checked. The knocking continued, but there was no shadow, no legs, nothing. We were scared, but it was late and I fell asleep quickly. The next night, the knocking came again. When I woke up, my mom, dad, aunt, and her husband were already awake because of the noise. The knocking stopped for a second, and then something tried the doorknob, like it was trying to get inside. It was locked, and whatever was out there seemed to get angry. We were terrified, and then it stopped. A few minutes later, we heard stomping, loud stomping, like something big was walking right outside. Oh, and I almost forgot. My dad checked under the door again. Still no shadow, still no legs. After the noises faded, my dad stepped outside to check. My aunt's husband stayed inside watching the space under the door, to see if he would see my dad's legs or shadow from the hallway. His face changed instantly. He looked terrified because he saw my dad's legs and shadow clearly. Then my dad came back inside and we were all still scared. The next day, we packed up and left. My mom and aunt asked a worker if maybe there had been a drunk guest wandering around. But he told them, "Oh, the other customers were all gone. Their dates expired. The only customers here were you." We were shocked. Since then, I've wondered, did someone try to break into that room and hide their legs so they couldn't be seen? Or was it something else that knocked on that door?